The biting November wind swept through the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, 1885. But not a soul in the saloon noticed the cold. They were all too busy noticing him. Isaiah Aldridge sat alone at the corner table, his back to the wall, whiskey glass untouched, eyes hard as the iron on his hip. 4 years he'd been riding through these parts, and not once had anyone seen the man's face crack so much as a hint of warmth. The piano player struck up a lively tune, but the music seemed to die before it reached Isaiah's corner. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His face might have been handsome if it weren't perpetually set in stone-high cheekbones, strong jaw covered in 3 days' worth of stubble, and eyes the color of a thunderstorm. The gun belt slung low on his hips had notches enough to make even the rowdiest cowboys give him a wide berth. Another. Asked Sam, the barkeep, already pouring before Isaiah could answer. Isaiah gave a curt nod, the closest thing to communication the townsfolk ever got from him. Rumor had it he'd been a Texas Ranger once before something happened, something so terrible it had locked his smile away forever. Others said he'd been a hired gun who'd lost everyone he ever cared for. Whatever the truth, Isaiah Aldridge had ridden into Redemption Creek one day, taken a job at the Wallace Ranch, and spoken maybe 50 words since. You hear about the new schoolteacher arriving tomorrow. Sam ventured, wiping a glass with a questionable rag. Coming all the way from Boston, they say. Isaiah didn't respond. His calloused fingers rotated the whiskey glass slightly, the amber liquid catching the dim lamplight. Stagecoaches due at noon, Sam continued, undeterred by Isaiah's silence. Whole town's curious what kind of woman would choose to come all the way out here. Must be desperate or crazy, or both. He chuckled at his own assessment. The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of cold air and Wallace's foreman, a burly man named Everett. "Aldridge," he called out, "boss wants you at the ranch. Trouble with rustlers again." Without a word, Isaiah downed his whiskey in one swallow, placed a coin on the table, and stood. He adjusted his hat, a black Stetson worn at the edges nodded once to Sam, and strode out into the night, spurs jangling with each purposeful step. The morning brought no warmth with it, just watery sunlight filtering through clouds that promised snow before long. Isaiah had tracked the rustlers for miles, finding nothing but old tracks and a sense of unease. By the time he returned to town, it was approaching noon, and despite himself, he found his horse slowing near the stagecoach depot. A small crowd had gathered, nothing unusual when the stagecoach arrived, as it was often the only connection to the outside world. Isaiah dismounted but kept his distance, telling himself he was only stopping to send a telegram to Wallace about the rustlers. The stagecoach appeared on the horizon, a cloud of dust marking its approach. It rumbled to a stop, the horses snorting and stamping. The driver secured the reins and climbed down to open the door. First emerged an elderly gentleman in a suit too fine for these parts, followed by a young man who looked ill-suited to the frontier. And then she appeared. She stepped down from the stagecoach with the grace of someone who knew her own mind, her deep blue traveling dress somehow untouched by the dust of the journey. Her honey blonde hair was pinned beneath a modest hat, and though she looked weary, there was a determined set to her jaw that spoke of inner strength. "Miss Julia Donovan, I presume?" Mayor Collins stepped forward, offering his hand. "Welcome to Redemption Creek." "Thank you, Mayor," she replied, her voice clear and carrying a hint of the East in its cadence. "I'm eager to begin my duties as soon as possible." Something strange happened to Isaiah in that moment. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something, interest, curiosity. Whatever it was, it made him uncomfortable enough that he turned away, intent on completing his business and getting back to the ranch. "Mr. Aldridge," called the telegraph operator, waving him over. "Got a message came in for you yesterday." Isaiah frowned. Nobody sent him telegrams. He took the paper, unfolding it with fingers that suddenly seemed clumsy. "Need your help, stop old debts calling stop. They found me stop." The signature made his blood run cold. Marcus. His brother. His dead brother, or so he'd believed for the past 5 years. When he looked up, his gaze inadvertently met that of the new schoolteacher. For a brief moment, their eyes locked across the dusty street. Julia Donovan tilted her head slightly, as though puzzled by the intensity of his stare. Isaiah broke the connection first, stuffing the telegram into his pocket and mounting his horse with fluid efficiency. As he rode away, he could feel her watching him. The sensation prickled between his shoulder blades like the warning of a coming storm. Julia Donovan had expected Redemption Creek to be small, but the reality was even more modest than she'd imagined. One main street, a handful of side streets, buildings made primarily of wood weathered by sun and wind. It wasn't Boston, but then, that was precisely why she'd come. "Your accommodations are above the schoolhouse," Mayor Collins explained as they walked. "Nothing fancy, but clean and secure. The previous teacher, Miss Holloway, left rather abruptly, I'm afraid. Family emergency back east." "I'm sure it will be perfectly adequate," Julia replied, though her Eastern upbringing made her wonder what passed for clean in a frontier town. "That man at the telegraph office," she said after a moment. "The one who rode off, he seemed." "Isaiah Aldridge." "Best not concern yourself with him, Miss Donovan. Keeps to himself, that one. Works for Emmett Wallace at the big ranch outside town, handy with cattle and even handier with that colt on his hip, if you take my meaning." "Is he dangerous?" The mayor laughed nervously. "Only if you cross him, they say. Been here 4 years and hasn't caused trouble, just doesn't mix with folk. Cold as December, that one." Julia found herself intrigued despite the mayor's warning. There had been something in the man's eyes when they'd met her, something beneath the hard exterior that spoke of depths and perhaps pain. "Here we are," said the mayor, stopping before a modest building with a bell mounted on its roof. "Schoolhouse by day, church on Sundays. Your quarters are around back." The room was indeed clean, if sparse. A narrow bed, a small stove, a writing desk beneath a window that looked out over the hills beyond town. Julia set down her carpetbag and removed her hat, feeling the exhaustion of the journey finally settling into her bones. "Classes begin Monday," the mayor informed her. 27 children ages 5 to 16. The key is under that loose board by the door. Town council meets Wednesday evenings if you have any concerns. After he left, Julia sat on the edge of the bed, wondering not for the first time if she had made a terrible mistake. Boston, with its familiar streets and social constraints, seemed a world away. Here she was, 24 years old, unmarried, and alone in a town where she knew no one. The telegram from her cousin Rebecca had promised adventure and purpose. Teachers desperately needed stop opportunity to build something meaningful. Stop. What it hadn't mentioned was the isolation, the dust, or the unsettling cowboys with storm-gray eyes. Julia rose and went to the window. From here, she could see the vast expanse of the territory stretching toward distant mountains. So different from the crowded streets of Boston, so open, so free, perhaps that was why she'd really come. Freedom from expectations, from the pitying glances of friends whose marriages were already producing children, from the memory of David and his betrayal. She unpacked her few belongings, placing her books on the shelf above the desk. Shakespeare, Emerson, a volume of Tennyson, and the McGuffey readers she would use with her students. Last came the framed daguerreotype of her parents, both gone now, her father to the war and her mother to the consumption that followed her grief. By Sunday evening, Julia had familiarized herself with the town, introduced herself to many of the families whose children would be her pupils, and organized her classroom. What she hadn't done was catch another glimpse of the taciturn cowboy who had so intrigued her at the stagecoach depot. Until the church service. She saw him slip in after the sermon had begun, positioning himself at the very back, hat in hand. Even in church, Isaiah Aldridge maintained his distance from the congregation, his face impassive as Reverend Thompson expounded on the virtues of community and brotherhood. Julia found her attention wandering from the sermon to the mysterious figure at the rear. He stood straight-backed, respectful but apart. When the service concluded, he was the first to leave, disappearing before the congregation filed out. curious about our local mystery, Miss Donovan. The voice belonged to Emma Peterson, wife of the town's doctor. Julia felt her cheeks warm. I was just surprised to see him in church. The mayor gave me the impression Mr. Aldridge wasn't one for social gatherings. Church is different, Emma said, adjusting her bonnet. He never misses a Sunday service, though he never stays for the social after. 4 years, and no one knows much more about him than the day he rode in. Surely someone must know something. Emma lowered her voice. Well, there is one story. Heard it from my husband, who treated him once when he took a bad fall from a horse. Said Isaiah has a scar right over his heart, like someone tried to kill him once and nearly succeeded. When Paul asked about it, Isaiah just said, a reminder, that's all. But he was feverish at the time, kept muttering a name, Marcus, I think. Paul figures it was family. The name struck a chord with Julia. Marcus wasn't that the name she'd glimpsed on the telegram Isaiah had received. The children are terrified of him, Emma continued. Call him the ghost because he's so quiet. Yet Emmett Wallace trusts him with his life and his livelihood. Curious, isn't it? Indeed it was. And Julia Donovan had always been too curious for her own good, according to her mother. Monday morning brought the organized chaos of 27 children filing into the schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with a mixture of suspicion and interest. Julia had dressed with care in her most professional attire, a high-collared shirtwaist and dark skirt that spoke of authority and competence. Good morning, children, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. I am Miss Donovan, and I'm delighted to be your new teacher. The day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and establishing rules. By afternoon, Julia had identified her most promising students, her most challenging ones, and those who would need extra attention. She was erasing the chalkboard when a small voice spoke from the doorway. Miss Donovan, a girl of about 8 stood there, thin and serious-faced, with dark braids and eyes too old for her years. Yes, and you are Sarah, correct, the girl nodded. Sarah Wallace. My pa sent me to invite you to dinner at our ranch this Saturday. He says it's tradition to welcome the new schoolteacher properly. That's very kind of him, Julia replied, touched by the gesture. Please tell your father I would be honored to accept. Sarah nodded solemnly. Pa says to tell you he'll send someone to fetch you at 4 o'clock. I'll be ready. As Sarah turned to leave, Julia couldn't help asking, Your father is Emmett Wallace, of the Wallace Ranch? Yes, madam, the biggest spread in the county, and does Mr. Aldridge work for your father? Something flickered in the child's eyes. Isaiah, yes, madam, he's pa's right hand. The other men don't like him much, but pa says he's worth any 5 of them. I see, thank you, Sarah. The girl hesitated, then added in a rush, he saved my life once, last winter. My pony spooked during a blizzard and threw me. Isaiah tracked us for miles in that storm. Found me half frozen and carried me home. Pa says I'd have died for sure if not for him. Before Julia could respond, Sarah darted away, leaving the teacher with yet another piece of the puzzle that was Isaiah Aldridge. Saturday arrived clear and cold. Julia dressed with particular care, selecting her green woolen dress with the modest lace collar formal enough for a dinner with the area's most prominent rancher, but not so fine as to appear pretentious. At precisely 4 o'clock, hoofbeats approached the schoolhouse. Julia peered out the window, half expecting to see a ranch hand or perhaps Mr. Wallace himself. Instead, Isaiah Aldridge sat atop a magnificent bay gelding, another horse-a-gentle-looking mare on a lead beside him. Julia's heart quickened inexplicably. She took a steadying breath, donned her coat and gloves, and stepped outside. Mr. Aldridge, she greeted him, proud that her voice betrayed none of her sudden nervousness. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. Miss Donovan. His voice was deep, slightly rough, as though unused to speech. It was the first time she'd heard it. Mr. Wallace sent you to escort me. She approached the mare, who nickered softly. Isaiah dismounted in one fluid motion and moved to help her. Yes, madam. His hands were strong and sure as he assisted her into the saddle, the brief contact sending an unexpected warmth through her despite the layers of clothing between them. Thank you, she said, gathering the reins. He nodded once and remounted his own horse, and they set off at a comfortable pace. For the first mile, they rode in silence. Julia found herself stealing glances at her companion, noting the easy way he sat his horse, the alertness in his posture despite his outward calm. "I understand you saved Sarah Wallace during a blizzard last winter," she finally said, unable to bear the silence any longer. Isaiah glanced at her, surprise momentarily replacing his stoic expression. "She told you that, she did. It was very brave of you." He looked away, focusing on the trail ahead. "Just did what needed doing." "Nevertheless, it speaks well of your character." A muscle in his jaw twitched, but he said nothing. "How long have you worked for Mr. Wallace?" Julia tried again. 4 years, and before that." This time his look was sharp, assessing. "Does it matter, Miss Donovan?" "I suppose not," she conceded. "I'm simply trying to make conversation, not much for conversation." Despite his curt responses, Julia sensed no hostility from him, only a deep-seated wariness, as though human interaction itself were dangerous territory. "Well, Mr. Aldridge, you should know I'm quite stubborn. My mother always said it would be my downfall." She offered a small smile. "So I'll likely keep attempting conversation, even if you prefer silence." For just an instant, something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Been warned, then." They crested a hill, and the Wallace Ranch spread out before them, a large main house, bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and various outbuildings, all nestled in a protected valley with a creek running through it. Cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides, and in the distance, a line of mountains rose against the sky. "It's beautiful," Julia breathed. Isaiah glanced at her, then back at the view. "Yes," he agreed quietly, "it is." It was the first voluntary comment he'd made, and Julia counted it as a small victory. The Wallace home was impressive by frontier standards, a 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with glass windows and a wide porch. Emmett Wallace himself came out to greet them, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that broke into a warm smile. "Miss Donovan, welcome to Rocking W. I see Isaiah got you here in one piece." He helped her dismount with practiced ease. "Isaiah, take care of the horses, then come in. Sarah's been talking about this dinner all week." Isaiah led both horses away without a word, and Wallace ushered Julia inside. The interior was surprisingly refined, good furniture, a piano in the corner, bookshelves filled with volumes, and a large fireplace where flames danced merrily. "My late wife's influence," Wallace explained, noticing Julia's appreciation. "Caroline insisted on bringing civilization with us when we came west in '68, said just because we lived on the frontier didn't mean we had to be savage about it." Sarah appeared, looking transformed in a pretty blue dress, her dark hair neatly braided and tied with matching ribbons. "Miss Donovan, did you see the foals in the corral? They were born this spring." "I didn't. Perhaps you can show me after dinner." The meal was excellent: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert, prepared by the Wallace's housekeeper, Mrs. Gunderson, a Swedish widow who kept house with military efficiency. Isaiah joined them, clean-shaven and in a fresh shirt, though he still wore his gun belt. Julia noticed he chose the seat that allowed him a clear view of both the door and the windows, his back to the wall. He ate quietly, speaking only when directly addressed by Wallace. "Isaiah tells me you're from Boston," Wallace said as they finished their pie. Julia looked up in surprise. Isaiah had volunteered information about her. "Yes, though I was raised primarily in New York until my father died. Then my mother and I moved to Boston to live with her sister." "Long way from home," Wallace commented. "What brings a refined Eastern lady to our dusty corner of the territory?" Julia considered her answer carefully. "A desire to be useful, I suppose, to build something meaningful. My cousin Rebecca teaches in Colorado and wrote of the desperate need for educators out west." "Brave of you," Wallace said approvingly. "Not many young ladies would venture out alone." "I've found that women are often braver than they're given credit for, Mr. Wallace." He laughed heartily. "Indeed they are, Miss Donovan. My Caroline would have agreed with you wholeheartedly." After dinner, Sarah gave Julia a tour of the ranch, proudly showing off the foals, her own pony, and a litter of kittens in the barn. As they returned to the house, Julia noticed Isaiah by the corral, working with a spirited young horse that danced nervously at the end of a long rope. "That's Tempest," Sarah explained, following her gaze. "Nobody can get near him except Isaiah. Pa says they understand each other." Julia watched as Isaiah spoke softly to the skittish animal, his movements deliberate and patient. Gradually, the horse calmed, eventually allowing Isaiah to touch its neck. There was something almost magical in the transformation, the wild creature learning to trust. "Does he have family?" Julia asked suddenly. Sarah shrugged. "Don't think so. He never gets letters or visits. Stays in the bunkhouse with the other men but keeps to himself. Pa offered him the old line cabin once, but he turned it down. When it came time to return to town, Isaiah once again served as her escort. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in gold and amber. They rode in companionable silence for a while, Julia content to absorb the beauty around them. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Aldridge," she said as they neared town. "I enjoyed the evening very much," he nodded, eyes on the trail. "Wallace is a good man." "Yes, he seems so." "And Sarah is a delightful child. Smart, too smart for this place, maybe." It was the most personal observation he'd offered, and Julia seized the opening. "Do you feel that way about yourself as well? Too smart for this place?" Isaiah's gaze snapped to hers, surprise evident. For a moment she thought he might actually answer, might reveal something of himself. Then his expression closed again. "Town's just ahead," he said instead. They reached the schoolhouse as twilight deepened into true darkness. Isaiah dismounted and came to help her down. His hands at her waist were strong and steady, and when her feet touched the ground they stood closer than propriety strictly allowed, her face tilted up to his in the gathering shadows. For one breathless moment, Julia thought, but no. Isaiah stepped back, touching his hat brim. "Good night, Miss Donovan." "Good night, Mr. Aldridge. Thank you again." He waited until she was safely inside before riding away. Julia stood at her window, watching his silhouette disappear into the night, aware of a curious sense of disappointment. The next morning brought unwelcome excitement to Redemption Creek. Julia was preparing for church when she heard shouting in the street. She hurried to her window to see a group of riders, rough-looking men with bandanas pulled up over their faces, galloping through town, firing pistols into the air. "Open the bank," one shouted. "Now, or we start shooting people instead of air," Julia's heart pounded. A bank robbery in broad daylight. She should stay inside, she knew, but concern for her students who might be in the street drove her to the door. The scene outside was chaotic, townspeople scattering, children crying, the bank manager fumbling with keys as a bandit held a gun to his head. 3 more outlaws kept their weapons trained on the crowd, while 2 others remained mounted, watching the street. Julia spotted young Jimmy Porter frozen in fear right in the open. Without thinking, she rushed toward him, intent on pulling him to safety. "Get back inside, lady," one of the bandits yelled. She ignored him, reaching Jimmy and pushing him toward the general store. "Run, Jimmy." The boy bolted, but now Julia stood exposed. The bandit swore and swung his gun toward her. A shot rang out, but not from the bandit's weapon. The man screamed, his gun flying from suddenly nerveless fingers as blood spurted from his shattered wrist. Isaiah Aldridge stood in the middle of the street, his Colt smoking, face set in grim lines. "Drop your weapons," he commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who would not ask twice. One of the mounted outlaws wheeled his horse. "Aldridge." "Is that you, you son of a—" Isaiah fired again, the bullet taking the man's hat clean off his head. "Next one goes between your eyes, Harlan. Tell your boys to drop their iron." The leader, Harlan, snarled something, but made a gesture to his men. Reluctantly, they lowered their weapons. "Now back away from those people," Isaiah continued, advancing slowly, his gun unwavering. The town marshal and several armed citizens had appeared, their own weapons drawn. The bandits, seeing their advantage evaporating, began to retreat toward their horses. "This isn't over, Aldridge," Harlan spat. "The boss wants what's his." "Then he should come get it himself," Isaiah replied coldly, "instead of sending dogs to do a man's work." Harlan's face contorted with rage, but he was outnumbered now. He and his men mounted and galloped away, leaving only dust and shaken nerves behind. The marshal approached Isaiah. "You know those men from another life," Isaiah replied tersely. His gaze found Julia still standing in the street, and something like fear flashed across his face before the mask descended again. He holstered his weapon and strode toward her. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "No, I'm fine, just startled." Julia realized she was trembling. "Jimmy was in the street. You could have been killed." The words were harsh, but there was something in his tone that belied the harshness, concern, perhaps even fear. "What were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking," she admitted. "I was reacting." "As you did," his jaw tightened. "Not the same thing," the marshal interrupted them. "Miss Donovan, you should get inside, let the doctor check you over. You've had a shock." "I'm really quite all right," she insisted, though her knees felt decidedly unsteady. "I'll see her home," Isaiah said, brooking no argument. He escorted her back to the schoolhouse, a hand at her elbow, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings as though expecting the bandits to return. Once inside, he checked the locks on her windows and door with practiced efficiency. "Stay inside today," he instructed. "Keep your doors locked." "Do you think they'll come back?" Isaiah's expression was grim. "Not today, but they might. You knew them." It wasn't a question, and Isaiah didn't treat it as one. He moved to the window, looking out at the now quiet street. "From Texas, long time ago." "Who is the boss they mentioned?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, "My brother." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. "Your brother," Julia repeated carefully. "I thought." "Sarah said you had no family." Not anymore." His shoulders were rigid with tension. "Marcus died 5 years ago, or I thought he did," understanding dawned. "The telegram at the depot, it was from him." Isaiah turned, surprise evident. "You noticed that? I'm observant." She took a step toward him. "Isaiah, what's happening?" It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it seemed to startle both of them. A complicated series of emotions crossed his face: wariness, confusion, and something that might have been longing. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with," he finally said, retreating behind his walls again. "Just old business that needs settling. These men are dangerous." "Yes," he moved toward the door, "which is why you should stay clear of me." "Wait," Julia reached out, catching his sleeve. "You can't just leave it at that, not after what happened today." Isaiah looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something in his eyes made her breath catch a vulnerability quickly masked. "There's nothing to tell that would do you any good to hear, Miss Donovan." "Julia," she corrected softly. "My name is Julia." For an instant, something in his expression softened, then he gently removed her hand from his sleeve. "Stay inside, Julia, please." With that, he was gone, leaving her with more questions than answers and a strange ache in her chest. Church was canceled that day, the town too shaken by the attempted robbery. By Monday, however, a semblance of normalcy had returned. School resumed, though attendance was lower than usual, some parents keeping their children home out of lingering fear. Julia tried to focus on her teaching, but her thoughts kept straying to Isaiah and the danger he seemed to be in. The marshal had increased patrols around town, and rumor had it that Wallace had doubled the guards at his ranch, but there had been no further sign of the bandits. On Wednesday, as Julia was dismissing her class for the day, a visitor appeared at the schoolhouse door. Emma Peterson, the doctor's wife, looking worried. "Miss Donovan, I hope I'm not intruding," she began. "Not at all. The children were just leaving. Is everything all right?" Emma waited until the last student had departed before speaking again. "It's about Mr. Aldridge. Paul treated him last night, bullet wound to the shoulder. Not serious, but concerning given the circumstances." Julia's heart lurched. "He was shot. By whom?" He wouldn't say. "Rode in after dark, got patched up, and rode right back out. Paul says he was in a dark mood, even for him. Mentioned something about finishing it once and for all." "Did he say where he was going?" Emma shook her head. "But my Paul's worried he means to face these outlaws alone." Said Isaiah asked about an old line cabin in Wilson's Canyon. It's abandoned, belongs to the Wallace Ranch. "We should tell the marshal," Julia said, already reaching for her shawl. Paul did. Marshall says he can't spare men to chase after Aldridge on a hunch. Not with the town still nervous about those bandits returning, Julia made a decision then that would alter the course of her life. Where exactly is this cabin? Emma's eyes widened. You can't be thinking of going there yourself. I'm just asking for information, Mrs. Peterson. It's about 12 miles northwest up in the foothills. But Miss Donovan, it would be extremely dangerous. Thank you for telling me about Isaiah's injury, Julia interrupted smoothly. I'll pray for his quick recovery. After Emma left, Julia sat at her desk for a long moment, heart racing. What she was contemplating was foolish, possibly suicidal, and certainly improper. A lady did not ride alone into the wilderness to find a wounded cowboy, especially one with a mysterious past and dangerous enemies. Yet something in her rebelled at the thought of doing nothing while Isaiah faced his demons alone. He had saved her life and the lives of others in town. Didn't she owe him at least an attempt to return the favor? The livery stable owner was reluctant to rent her a horse until she fabricated a story about visiting a sick student on an outlying farm. Even then, he insisted she take the most docile mare in his stable and extracted a promise she would return before dark. It was a promise Julia already knew she might not be able to keep. The ride took longer than she'd anticipated. The trail grew steeper and less defined as she entered the foothills, and twice she feared she'd taken a wrong turn. The afternoon was waning when she finally spotted smoke rising from a chimney in a small clearing ahead. The cabin was little more than a one-room structure of rough-hewn logs with a lean-to stable attached. A horse Isaiah's bay gelding was tethered near a small stream that ran alongside the clearing. Julia dismounted and approached cautiously, suddenly uncertain. What if he wasn't alone? What if the bandits had found him first? What would she say to explain her presence? Before she could decide whether to announce herself or retreat, the cabin door swung open. Isaiah stood framed in the doorway, rifle in hand, his face a mask of disbelief when he recognized his visitor. "Julia, what in God's name are you doing here?" She straightened her spine. "Mrs. Peterson told me you were injured. I was concerned." "So you rode 12 miles into bandit country, alone?" His voice rose with each word, anger and something like fear making it sharp. "Have you lost your mind?" "Possibly," she admitted. "Are you going to invite me in, or shall we continue this conversation while I stand out here in the cold?" For a moment, she thought he might actually send her away. Then his shoulders sagged slightly and he stepped aside. "Come in, but you can't stay long. It'll be dark soon, and the trail's dangerous even in daylight." The interior of the cabin was spare but clean: a table and 2 chairs, a narrow cot against one wall, a small cookstove with a pot of something that smelled like coffee simmering on top. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the room. Julia unwrapped her shawl and draped it over one of the chairs. "How is your shoulder?" Isaiah set the rifle aside but didn't answer immediately. He moved to the stove and poured coffee into a tin cup, which he offered to her silently. Only when she had taken it did he speak. "It's fine. Peterson makes too much of a scratch. A bullet wound is hardly a scratch. I've had worse. That doesn't make it better." Julia took a sip of the coffee, strong and black, but warming. "Why are you here, Isaiah? What are you planning?" He leaned against the table, arms crossed. The movement caused him to wince slightly, confirming that his injury was more serious than he claimed. "You shouldn't have come," he said, ignoring her questions. "It's not safe. Because of your brother, the one who's supposedly dead." Isaiah's gaze sharpened. "What do you know about that?" "Only what you told me and what I overheard during the robbery attempt." "Your brother is the one who sent those men, isn't he?" "Why? What does he want from you?" For a long moment, Isaiah was silent, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. Then, abruptly, he moved to a saddlebag hanging on a peg by the door. From it, he withdrew a small leather pouch which he tossed onto the table between them. "That's what he wants." Julia set down her coffee cup and carefully opened the pouch. Inside lay a gold pocket watch, ornately engraved and clearly valuable. "I don't understand." Isaiah's laugh was bitter. "Neither did I at first. It's just a watch, right? Belonged to our father. When he died, Marcus got the ranch, I got the watch. Seemed fair at the time. But it's more than just a watch. Inside is a map to a gold mine. One that rightfully belongs to the Apache on their sacred land, but was discovered by a prospector who got himself killed before he could file a claim. He'd made a map, though, and somehow my father ended up with it. And your brother wants it. Isaiah nodded grimly. Marcus always was greedy. After I left the Rangers, I went back home to help him run the ranch. Found out he'd gotten involved with some bad men, planning to use the map to stake a claim and mine the gold illegally. I refused to give it to him. His hand went unconsciously to his chest, where Emma had said a scar lay. We fought, he shot me, left me for dead. Took the watch, but couldn't figure out how to open the secret compartment. So he's been looking for you all this time, apparently. I thought he'd given up. Thought maybe he'd gotten himself killed in one of his schemes. Then that telegram came. Julia fingered the watch thoughtfully. Why don't you just give it to him? Is it worth your life? It's not about the watch anymore, Isaiah said quietly. It's about the people he's hurt trying to get it, good people, and the ones he'll hurt if he gets his hands on that mine. The Apache in these parts have had enough stolen from them. I won't let him take this too. So what's your plan? To face him alone? That's suicide, Isaiah. He shrugged, then winced again at the movement. Got no choice. Can't involve anyone else. Too dangerous. The marshal is one man with a tin star. Marcus has at least 6 guns riding with him, probably more by now. Julia set the watch down carefully. When do you expect them? Isaiah's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Why? Because I'm trying to understand what you're planning. He studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. They've been watching the ranch, watching the town, looking for me for the watch. I let Harlan spot me heading this way yesterday, made sure he followed me far enough to see where I was going. They'll come tonight, most likely. Or tomorrow at dawn. A trap, Julia realized. You're setting a trap, of sorts. He nodded toward the window, where she noticed for the first time that the glass had been removed, leaving a clear firing position. Similar preparations had been made at another window. I know this ground. They don't, and they'll be expecting one injured man, not a prepared position. Still bad odds, Julia observed. Is that why you're up here alone, because you don't expect to survive? The question hung in the air between them. Isaiah looked away first. You need to leave, he said. Now, while there's still daylight, Julia rose, but not to comply. She moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the faint lines at their corners. I'm not leaving you to die, Isaiah. This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you saved my life in town. His expression softened momentarily. That's different. I'm trained for this. You're a helpless woman, she challenged. A schoolteacher, he corrected, with students who need you, with a whole life ahead of you. I can shoot, she said. My father taught me. After the war he was different, afraid. He insisted I learn to protect myself. Isaiah shook his head. Knowing how to shoot at targets isn't the same as shooting at men who are shooting back. Then I'll help in other ways. I can reload. I can watch your back. I can tend your wound properly, and don't tell me it doesn't need tending. I can see the blood seeping through your shirt right now. He glanced down in surprise, noticing for the first time that his wound had indeed reopened. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he muttered, so I've been told. She reached for her shawl. Now, sit down and let me look at that shoulder, then you can tell me exactly what you have planned and how I can help. To her amazement, he complied, sinking into a chair with a sigh that spoke of bone-deep weariness. As Julia unwrapped the bloodied bandage to examine the bullet wound beneath, their eyes met, and for the first time since she'd known him, Isaiah Aldridge's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. It wasn't much, just a brief lifting of one corner of his mouth, a momentary softening of those storm cloud eyes, but to Julia it felt like the sun breaking through after a long winter. There, she said softly. That wasn't so hard, was it? His smile deepened just slightly. Harder than you know. Night fell swiftly in the mountains, darkness pooling in the valleys and sweeping upward until even the highest peaks were swallowed by it. Inside the cabin, Isaiah and Julia prepared as best they could. He showed her how to reload his spare pistol and where to position herself should shooting start behind the heavy oak table. which he overturned to create a barricade. "If it goes badly," he told her, checking the action on his rifle for the third time, "there's a trail behind the cabin that leads up into the rocks. It's hard to follow unless you know it's there. You could make it out that way." Julia, who had changed from her riding skirt into a pair of men's trousers Isaiah had reluctantly provided from his saddlebag, scandalized as she was by the impropriety, practicality won out, looked up from arranging medical supplies on the hearth. "I'm not running," she said simply. "Julia, no." Her tone brooked no argument. "I made my choice when I rode up here. I'm staying." They ate a simple meal of bacon and beans, neither particularly hungry but both knowing they needed strength. Afterward, they settled in to wait, Isaiah by the window, Julia nearby with the spare pistol at hand. "Tell me about Boston," he said after a long silence, surprising her. "What do you want to know? Anything? What it's like? Why you left?" Julia considered the question. "Boston is proper. Everything and everyone in its place. There are rules for every social interaction, expectations for every stage of life. I was failing to meet those expectations." "How so?" "I was 24 and unmarried, practically a spinster by Boston standards." She smiled wryly. "There was a man, David. We were engaged. Then I discovered he was also engaged to Catherine Prescott, whose father owns 3 textile mills and a shipping company." "Ah," Isaiah said. "Money, money," she agreed. "My family was respectable but not wealthy. After the scandal broke, my aunt suggested it might be best if I visited relatives for a while. That's when Rebecca's letter about teaching opportunities in the West arrived. It seemed providential." "Their loss," Isaiah said quietly, "our gain." The simple statement warmed her more than the fire. "What about you?" she asked. "You said you were a ranger once," he nodded, eyes still on the darkness outside. 8 years. Joined up young after my father died and Marcus made it clear I wasn't welcome at the ranch anymore. The Rangers gave me purpose, structure, a code to live by." "Why did you leave?" His face hardened. "A massacre, Comanche village, women, children, they didn't even have weapons. Orders came down to clear the area for a new settlement. I refused. My captain didn't take kindly to that." "So you resigned," after a fashion, involved my fist in his face. Isaiah's mouth twisted in a grimace. "Not my proudest moment. Might have ended up in prison if Wallace hadn't intervened. He knew my father, offered me a place here. That was fortunate." "Yes," Isaiah agreed. "Wallace is a good man, treats his hands fairly, respects the local tribes, built something worth protecting here." He glanced at her. "Like what you're building with that school. It's hardly the same scale, isn't it? You're shaping the future one child at a time. Seems pretty important to me." Before Julia could respond, a sound outside caught Isaiah's attention. He tensed, raising a hand for silence. In the stillness, she heard it too, the soft nickering of a horse, quickly hushed. "They're here," Isaiah whispered, his voice barely audible. "Get down behind the table." Julia complied, heart hammering against her ribs. Isaiah moved silently to extinguish the lamp, leaving only the dim glow of the banked fire to illuminate the cabin. For what seemed an eternity, there was nothing but silence and darkness. Then a voice called out from the night. "Isaiah." "I know you're in there, brother." Isaiah didn't respond. His face, half illuminated by the firelight, had gone completely still. "Come on, Isaiah," the voice continued. "Let's talk this out like family. No need for bloodshed." Still, Isaiah waited, rifle ready but not yet raised to fire. "I've got 10 men out here," the voice Marcus, it must be shouted. "You're injured. We saw the doctor visit. Be reasonable." Julia held her breath. Would Isaiah answer? Would he try to negotiate? The crash of a bullet through the window provided the answer. Isaiah dropped to one knee, raising his rifle in one smooth motion, and returned fire. The night erupted into chaos, muzzle flashes in the darkness, the thunder of gunfire, the splintering of wood as bullets found the cabin walls. Julia ducked lower behind the table, heart pounding. Isaiah fired methodically, changing position between shots to present a moving target. "I need to reload," he called to her during a momentary lull. "Watch the door." She gripped the pistol with suddenly damp hands, aiming at the door as Isaiah had shown her. Outside, she could hear men shouting, repositioning. "Isaiah," Marcus's voice again. This is your last chance. Throw out the watch and maybe we let the woman live. Julia's blood went cold. They knew she was here. How, your horse, Isaiah explained grimly, reading the question in her eyes. They would have found it. What do we do? She whispered. Keep fighting. He checked his rifle, jaw set. I'm sorry I got you into this. You didn't. I got myself into it. She managed a shaky smile. Stubborn, remember, the firing resumed, more intense this time. Isaiah returned it, his shots carefully placed, making each bullet count. But they were outnumbered, and eventually their ammunition would run out. A bullet splintered the window frame inches from Isaiah's head. He jerked back, swearing under his breath. They're getting closer. Trying to rush the cabin from two sides. The back trail, Julia said. If we could reach it, he shook his head. Too exposed, we'd never make it. Isaiah, Marcus called again. I'm coming in, let's end this face to face. Isaiah's expression hardened. Stay down, he instructed Julia. Whatever happens, stay down. The door burst open, kicked in with enough force to tear one hinge completely free. A man stood framed in the doorway, tall, with features similar to Isaiah's but harder, crueler. He held a pistol aimed directly at his brother. Hello, Isaiah, Marcus said, a cold smile playing around his lips. Long time? Isaiah's rifle was trained steadily on his brother's chest. Not long enough. Marcus stepped further into the cabin, revealing another man behind him, Harlan, the outlaw from town, his gun aimed at Julia. Put the rifle down, Marcus ordered, or Harlan decorates your lady friend's pretty dress with her brains. For a heartbeat, Isaiah didn't move. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. The watch, Marcus said. Where is it? Gone, Isaiah replied. I sent it to the territorial governor yesterday. Along with a full account of your plans and your crimes. It's over, Marcus. Marcus's face contorted with rage. You're lying. Am I? Check my saddlebags, check the cabin, it's not here. Julia held her breath, knowing the watch was actually in Isaiah's boot, where he'd hidden it after showing it to her. Would Marcus fall for the bluff? Search the place, Marcus ordered Harlan. Tear it apart if you have to. As Harlan moved to comply, lowering his gun slightly, Julia saw her chance. She threw the spare pistol not at Harlan, but to Isaiah. In one fluid movement, he caught it, swung it toward Marcus, and fired. Marcus staggered, a look of shock crossing his face as he clutched his chest. His own gun discharged, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as he fell. Harlan, caught off guard, had no time to raise his weapon before Isaiah's second shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. Outside, the night erupted with gunfire again, but not directed at the cabin. Shouts of confusion rose from Marcus's men. It's the marshal, someone yelled. And Wallace's men were surrounded? Isaiah moved swiftly to the door, keeping his gun on the wounded Harlan. Outside, lanterns illuminated a scene of surrender, Marcus's remaining men throwing down their weapons as mounted figures closed in from all sides. Isaiah, Wallace's voice boomed out. You alive in there? Yes, Isaiah called back. Got 2 wounded in here, Marcus and Harlan. The rest seemed to be giving up. Wallace appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, taking in the scene with a quick glance. Marshall's rounding up the rest. You two all right? Isaiah nodded, finally lowering his weapon. How did you know? Miss Donovan's absence was noted, Wallace said with a significant look at Julia. Mrs. Peterson had a sudden attack of conscience about sending a schoolteacher into danger, told her husband, who told me. Good thing she did, Isaiah acknowledged. They had us outnumbered. Wallace knelt beside the fallen Marcus, checking his wound. He'll live, unfortunately. Good, Isaiah said grimly. He can hang properly. As the marshal and his deputies, along with Wallace's men, secured the prisoners and tended to the wounded, Isaiah finally turned to Julia. His expression was complex relief, concern, and something deeper, more vulnerable. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. She shook her head. Just shaken. Her eyes fell on Marcus, who was being bound despite his injury. Is he really your brother? He seems so different from you. Half-brother, Isaiah corrected. Same father, different mothers. Marcus takes after his mother's side, always wanting what others have, never satisfied with his portion. He hesitated, then added more softly, Thank you, for the pistol, for staying. I would have died without you. We make a good team, she offered, attempting levity despite the trembling that had overtaken her now that the danger was past. Isaiah's face softened. Yes, we do. Dawn was breaking by the time they rode back to town, Isaiah insisting that a deputy escort Julia while he remained behind to help secure the scene. Though exhausted, she found she couldn't sleep upon returning to her quarters. Instead, she sat by her window, watching the sun rise over Redemption Creek, replaying the night's events in her mind. She had seen a side of Isaiah Aldridge few ever witnessed: his tactical mind, his unwavering courage, but also his compassion, his sense of justice, his willingness to sacrifice himself to protect others. And most surprisingly, those brief moments of warmth, of connection, that hinted at the man beneath the hard exterior. The question was, what happened now? She didn't have to wait long for an answer. 3 days later, as school was dismissing for the day, Isaiah appeared at the classroom door. He was freshly shaven, wearing a clean shirt beneath his usual vest, and looking decidedly uncomfortable to be standing in a schoolhouse surrounded by curious children. "Mr. Aldridge," Julia greeted him, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "This is a surprise. Miss Donovan." He nodded, then glanced meaningfully at the lingering students who were openly staring at the notorious silent cowboy who had suddenly appeared in their domain. "Children, you're dismissed," Julia said briskly. "Don't forget your arithmetic assignments for tomorrow." When the last child had departed, casting fascinated backward glances, Isaiah removed his hat and stepped fully into the room. "I came to thank you," he began, "properly, for what you did at the cabin." "There's no need." "There is," he insisted. "You saved my life, put yourself in danger for me." Not many would have done that. Julia moved to erase the chalkboard, needing something to do with her hands. "I acted on instinct, really, as you did in town during the robbery attempt. Still," he took a step closer, "I'm grateful." She turned to face him, struck anew by the intensity of his gaze. "What will happen to your brother?" "Trial next month in Tucson. The territorial governor's taking a personal interest, given the attempted claim jumping on Apache land. Wallace testified about the threats to his ranch. It doesn't look good for Marcus or his men." "And the watch, the map, returned to the Apache," Isaiah said. "Their land, their gold, it was the right thing to do." Julia nodded, pleased but not surprised by his decision. "And now, what will you do?" Something shifted in Isaiah's expression of vulnerability, a question. "That depends. On what? On you." He took another step closer. "Wallace has offered me a partnership, a small share in the ranch. Says he's getting too old to run it alone, and Sarah needs someone to look after her interests when he's gone. It's a good offer, means I'd be staying in Redemption Creek, permanently." Julia's heart quickened. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity. It could be." Isaiah hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain, if there was someone worth staying for. The air between them seemed to vibrate with possibility. Julia took a steadying breath. "Isaiah, are you asking me? I'm no good with words," he interrupted. "Never have been." "But what happened up at that cabin? I've never met anyone like you, Julia. Brave and stubborn and smart. Beautiful." He swallowed hard. "I've spent 4 years not letting myself care about anyone, not letting myself feel. Then you walked into that saloon and something changed." "The cowboy didn't smile for anyone until she walked into the room," Julia murmured, recalling Emma Peterson's words about Isaiah, his lips curved in confirmation of the statement. "I didn't think I had any smiles left in me, didn't think I deserved them, still not sure I do." "You do," she said simply. "You deserve happiness, Isaiah." He reached out tentatively, taking her hand in his. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see if there might be something here worth building, like your school, like Wallace's ranch, something that lasts." Julia looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, calloused from years of hard work. Then she looked up into his face, still serious, still guarded, but with hope in those storm-gray eyes that had once been so cold. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that very much." His smile then was like sunrise breaking over mountains, slow, gradual, but transforming everything in its path. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to it, a gesture so unexpectedly gentle it made her breath catch. "May I call on you properly then?" Sunday after church. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she replied, returning his smile with one of her own. When he left a few minutes later, Julia stood at the schoolhouse window, watching him stride down the street. Several townspeople nodded to him, and to her surprise, Isaiah nodded back, even exchanging a few words with the blacksmith. Already, he was changing, opening up, becoming part of the community in a way he hadn't allowed himself before. Spring arrived in Redemption Creek, bringing with it new growth, longer days, and the blossoming of an unlikely romance. Isaiah called on Julia every Sunday after church, gradually becoming a familiar sight at her side. They took proper, chaperoned walks through town, rode out to the Wallace Ranch for dinner, and attended the spring social together, though Isaiah drew the line at dancing, much to Julia's amusement. "Some transformations take longer than others," he told her wryly when she tried to coax him onto the dance floor. By summer, the whole town was abuzz with speculation about when the taciturn Cowboy and the Eastern schoolteacher would announce their engagement. Even Julia's students had caught on, giggling behind their hands when Isaiah appeared at the schoolhouse to escort their teacher home. In July, Wallace hosted an Independence Day celebration at the ranch, inviting the entire town. There were games for the children, a shooting competition, which Isaiah won handily, and a feast that lasted well into the evening. As twilight gathered, Wallace called for everyone's attention. "Got an announcement to make," he declared, standing on a platform erected for the occasion. "As some of you know, I've been thinking about the future of this ranch. Getting on in years, and Sarah here needs someone looking out for her interests." Sarah, standing beside her father, beamed at Isaiah, who stood near the platform with Julia at his side. "So I'm pleased to announce that Isaiah Aldridge is now officially my partner in the rocking W equals say in all decisions, equal share in the profits." Wallace raised his glass. "To Isaiah," the crowd echoed the toast, many looking genuinely pleased. In the months since the confrontation with Marcus, Isaiah had gradually earned the respect and even friendship of many townsfolk. His actions had saved the bank, possibly the town itself, and his quiet competence had won over even initial skeptics. As the celebration continued, Isaiah drew Julia away from the crowd, leading her toward the creek that gave the ranch its name. The evening was warm, the air scented with wildflowers and the distant smell of wood smoke. "Quite a change from last year," Julia observed as they walked. "You're practically a public figure now," Isaiah grimaced. "Hardly that. You smile more, though," she teased. "People are getting used to it. Only around you." He stopped beside the creek where the water burbled peacefully over stones. "Julia, there's something I want to ask you." Her heart skipped. "Yes." Isaiah reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Wallace is building me a house on the ranch property, nothing fancy but solid, room to grow." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "I'd like you to share it with me." "If you want to, as my wife." Julia looked from the ring to his face, seeing there all the emotions he'd once kept so carefully hidden: hope, vulnerability, and love, so much love. "Isaiah Aldridge," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am." He took her hand. "I love you, Julia. Never thought I'd say those words to anyone. Never thought I'd feel this way again or at all. You brought me back to life, made me want to live, not just survive." Tears welled in Julia's eyes. "I love you too." "Is that a yes?" he asked, a hint of his old wariness returning. In answer, she stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, their first kiss, sweet and full of promise. When they parted, both breathless, she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Isaiah Aldridge." His smile then was radiant, without reservation or shadow. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close for another kiss, deeper this time, sealing their promise to one another. They were married in September, when the aspen trees in the mountains turned to gold. The whole town turned out for the ceremony, held in the schoolhouse church where Julia had taught for nearly a year. Wallace gave the bride away, and Sarah served as flower girl, scattering wildflower petals with solemn dignity. Isaiah, standing at the altar in a new suit that did nothing to disguise his essential ruggedness, watched with wonder as Julia walked toward him on Wallace's arm. Her dress was simple but elegant, white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs, her honey blonde hair arranged beneath a crown of flowers. "Never seen a man look at a woman the way Isaiah looks at our Miss Donovan," Emma Peterson whispered to her husband as the bride passed. "Hard to believe he's the same man who rode into town 4 years ago, cold as ice." "Love changes people," the doctor replied sagely, "sometimes for the better." As Julia reached the altar and placed her hand in Isaiah's, the minister smiled at the couple before him. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today." The vows were traditional, but the emotion behind them was anything but ordinary. When Isaiah promised to love, honor, and cherish, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Julia's face. When she repeated the same vows, her voice carried to the back of the room, clear and certain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister concluded. "You may kiss your bride." Isaiah hesitated only a moment, still conscious of the watching crowd, before drawing Julia into his arms. The kiss was brief but tender, and when they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Aldridge, Isaiah's smile was so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire room. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and more than a few emotional toasts to the couple. Even Isaiah was persuaded to dance once, and only with his bride, but it was enough to elicit cheers from the onlookers. "See," Julia murmured as they swayed awkwardly to the music. "Not so terrible after all." "Only because it's you," he replied, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "I'd face down 100 gunmen for you, but dancing still scares me half to death." She laughed, the sound so joyful it made several heads turn. "I love you, Isaiah Aldridge." His smile, that smile that had once been so rare, came easily now, at least for her. "And I love you, Julia Aldridge." Their new home on the Wallace Ranch was indeed modest, but well-built, a 2-bedroom structure with a stone fireplace, glass windows, and a wide porch that faced the mountains. Isaiah had insisted on building bookshelves for Julia's growing collection and surprised her with a small piano similar to the one she'd played in Boston. "Where did you find it?" she asked in amazement when it was delivered the week after their wedding. Wallace helped, had it shipped from Denver. "Every home needs music." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly self-conscious. "At least, that's what my mother used to say." Julia sat at the instrument, playing a few experimental notes. "It's beautiful, Isaiah, thank you." Their life settled into a pattern, Isaiah working the ranch with Wallace, Julia continuing to teach at the schoolhouse in town. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, talking about their day or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. Word came in late autumn that Marcus Aldridge had been sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison for his crimes. Isaiah received the news with quiet satisfaction, but no desire to witness his half-brother's incarceration. "That part of my life is over," he told Julia when she asked if he wanted to attend the sentencing. "I'm looking forward now, not back." Winter brought heavy snows that sometimes isolated the ranch for days at a time. Isaiah and Julia found they didn't mind. Their home was warm, they had each other, and the quiet interlude gave them time to deepen their understanding of one another. Isaiah spoke more of his past, his mother who had died young, his years with the Rangers, the good and the bad. Julia shared stories of Boston, of her parents, of dreams she had once thought lost. By spring, there was new joy to share. "I'm with child," Julia told her husband one evening as they sat before the fire. "The doctor confirmed it today, a September baby, he thinks." Isaiah's face underwent a remarkable transformation, shock, wonder, and finally a joy so intense it brought tears to Julia's eyes. He knelt before her chair, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A child," he repeated, voice thick with emotion. "Our child. Are you pleased?" She asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. Pleased doesn't begin to describe it. He looked up at her, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Julia, you've given me everything I thought I'd never have, a home, love, and now a family. I don't have the words." "You don't need them," she assured him, cradling his face in her hands. "I know." The news spread quickly through Redemption Creek, bringing a flood of well wishes and practical gifts. Wallace was particularly delighted, declaring himself an honorary grandfather on the spot. Sarah, now 12, solemnly promised to help with the baby and immediately began knitting a blanket under Mrs. Gunderson's guidance. Summer passed in a haze of anticipation. Julia continued teaching until the end of the term, then reluctantly took leave as her condition became more pronounced. Isaiah became increasingly protective, much to her mingled amusement and exasperation. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him when he insisted on carrying her up the 3 steps to their porch. "Humor me," he replied, setting her gently on her feet. "I've never had so much to lose before," the words sobered her. For all his newfound happiness, Isaiah still carried the scars of his past, the expectation that good things could be taken away. She reached up to touch his face, heart aching with love for this complex man who had finally allowed himself to hope again. "You won't lose us," she promised. "We're here to stay." Their daughter was born on a crisp September evening, almost exactly a year after their wedding. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Emma Peterson serving as midwife. Isaiah paced the porch for hours, deaf to Wallace's attempts at distraction, until finally the cry of a newborn pierced the night. Emma appeared at the door, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. Aldridge. You have a beautiful, healthy daughter. Mother is doing fine as well." Isaiah stood frozen for a moment, as though unable to comprehend the words. Then he was moving, brushing past Emma into the bedroom where Julia lay propped against pillows, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked exhausted but radiant, her face glowing with a new kind of love. "Isaiah," she said softly, "come meet your daughter." He approached the bed almost reverently, sinking down beside it and gazing in wonder at the tiny face nestled among the blankets. The baby had a dusting of dark hair, and when she briefly opened her eyes, they were the deep blue of all newborns. "She's perfect," he whispered, reaching out to touch a miniature hand. The baby reflexively grasped his finger, holding tight. "What shall we call her?" Julia smiled. "I was thinking of Hope, because that's what she represents for both of us." Isaiah nodded, throat too tight for speech. Hope, the thing he'd lost and found again, the gift Julia had brought back into his life. "Hope Aldridge," he finally managed. "It's a good name, a strong name." As if in agreement, the baby made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a coo. Isaiah smiled down at his daughter, then at his wife, his heart so full it seemed impossible it had ever been empty. Years passed, bringing changes both great and small to Redemption Creek. The town grew, adding a proper church separate from the schoolhouse, a doctor's office for Paul Peterson, and eventually a bank that wasn't housed in the back room of the general store. The railroad came through in 1888, connecting the once isolated community to the wider world. The Wallace Ranch, now the Wallace and Aldridge Ranch, prospered, expanding its operations and employing more hands. The partnership between the older rancher and the former loaner proved unexpectedly complementary. Wallace's experience and Isaiah's innovative approaches, creating a sustainable operation that weathered even the harshest seasons. Julia continued teaching until their second child was born, a son they named Emmett, after Wallace, who had become like a father to them both. When Wallace passed peacefully in his sleep in 1890, he left the ranch to Sarah with the provision that Isaiah would manage her share until she came of age or married. It was a responsibility Isaiah took seriously, ensuring that Sarah's inheritance remained intact and profitable. Hope grew into a curious, adventurous girl with her mother's honey blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. By age 6, she could ride almost as well as her father and read almost as voraciously as her mother. Little Emmett, 3 years younger, was quieter but equally determined, following his sister everywhere. In 1895, 10 years after Julia had first arrived in Redemption Creek, the town council decided to celebrate the community's growth and prosperity with a special harvest festival. As the schoolteacher and wife of one of the area's most successful ranchers, Julia was asked to organize the event. "They want a speech," she told Isaiah one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Hope and Emmett play with the new puppy. From both of us as examples of the town's progress. Isaiah, who had grown more comfortable with community involvement over the years but still preferred actions to words, raised an eyebrow. "You know how I feel about speeches." "I know," she acknowledged, "but it would mean a lot to people." To hear from the man who helped save the town all those years ago, the man who's become such an important part of it. He sighed, knowing he would give in. He rarely denied Julia anything, a fact their children had learned to exploit on occasion. One paragraph, he conceded. "You can write the rest," Julia laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it, staying here becoming so settled?" Isaiah considered the question, looking out over the land that had become his home, at the family that had become his world. "Not for a single moment," he answered honestly. "Do you? You could have had a very different life in Boston." "A smaller life," she corrected him, "less authentic, less meaningful." She turned to face him, taking in the face she had loved for a decade now, the dark hair showing touches of silver at the temples, the lines at the corners of his eyes that came from smiling more often than not these days. "I found everything I needed here, with you." The Harvest Festival was held on a perfect autumn day, the town square decorated with bunting and harvest bounty. Almost everyone from Redemption Creek and the surrounding ranches attended, along with visitors from neighboring communities. When it came time for their speech, Julia took the lead, as agreed, speaking eloquently about the growth of the town and the strength of its community. Then, to her surprise, Isaiah stepped forward without prompting. 10 years ago, he began, his voice steady and carrying across the crowd, "I didn't believe in second chances, didn't believe in hope. Then a stagecoach arrived from Boston and a woman stepped down who would change everything." He looked at Julia, his expression soft. "Redemption Creek has grown and prospered in the past decade, but the real transformation happened right here." He placed a hand over his heart. "Julia taught me that it's never too late to begin again, that even the coldest winter eventually gives way to spring." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Emma Peterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even stern-faced Mrs. Gunderson looked suspiciously misty. "So here's to Redemption Creek," Isaiah concluded, raising his glass, "a place that lives up to its name." The toast was enthusiastically echoed, and as Isaiah stepped back beside Julia, she squeezed his hand, too moved for words. Hope and Emmett, who had been sitting with Sarah in the front row, ran up to their parents, the children's unself-conscious joy completing the picture of the family that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Isaiah and Julia slipped away for a quiet moment alone. They walked to the edge of town, where they could see both the festive lights of the square and the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "That was quite a speech," Julia said, linking her arm through his, "for a man of few words." Isaiah smiled, the expression now as natural to him as breathing. "Had a good teacher." He gazed down at her, his eyes reflecting the same wonder they had held when he first proposed. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Yes," she replied, "but I never tire of hearing it. I love you, Julia Aldridge." He drew her close, kissing her with the tenderness that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Thank you for walking into that stagecoach depot and changing my life. Thank you for finally smiling," she countered, resting her head against his chest, hearing the strong, steady beat of his heart. It was worth the wait. They stood together in the gathering darkness, the sounds of celebration at their backs, the vast promise of the western sky above them, and their future stretching out before them like an endless trail waiting to be explored. Together.